Hi, welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Today I want to show you how to create a fancy set Marquise pendant. Now this is a little bit more challenging than some of the pieces we've looked at before, but if you have even a little experience handling wire, I'm sure that this is something that you can definitely have a go at. I've got a couple of samples to show you first of all. I've made these with some absolutely stunning clear faceted quartz. They're faceted on the face and then flat on the back like a classic cabochon. And they've got those beautiful kite shaped facets on them. They're really lovely to work with. So for this design, you're also going to need some small beads. I've worked with really anything between 2 and 5mm size beads, faceted again to reflect the nature of the gemstones either side of your main focal piece. I've also got a little section here of labradorite in a very similar design, obviously not transparent, but something along the same lines that the technique will absolutely work for. If you join me down at the board, we can talk about what materials we're going to need. So first of all, here's a closer look. That's the rear side and the front side. The rear side and the front side. My two examples that we're looking at right now, faceted white quartz Marquise as the main feature gemstone, and I have on this particular piece some multi-tonal fluorite faceted beads. They're approximately 4 to 5mm, and then I have some 2mm faceted iolite beads for the other example piece, made with the same kind of technique, and that's what I'm going to show you today. So the materials we're going to be working with are two types of wire. I have got 1mm gauge 18 gauge raw copper wire, and I also have some 0.4mm or 26 gauge raw copper wire. You can use whichever wires you wish to, obviously in terms of colour, but these are the thicknesses that I would like to see. So to begin with, we're going to start by creating two shapes that are going to form fit our Marquise shaped cabochon. Oops, free hair included, many apologies about that. So there's my cabochon. My inner framework, which is what we're going to create first, needs to be a good 12 to 14 inches of the 1mm or 18 gauge wire to begin with. And I'm just going to get that nice and warm so it's really fluid to the touch. I'm just going to pop these up to the side so that you can still see them, but they're out of my way. And with my 14 or so inches of the 1mm 18 gauge wire, I'm going to find the centre point. I've pre-warmed this, and at that centre point I'm going to create quite a nice firm sharp point. Now I've got my point to begin with. I'm just going to bring that slightly closer together at the very tip, like so, almost like the end of a lemon, and then I'm going to grip hold of that and just open those wires out slightly. Then use the curvature and heat of my thumb, flip the design over, and we're looking to kind of create a beautiful eye shape or an elongated oval with points on the end, or that classic lemon shape. So we're using the domed faceted face of the gemstone in this instance, and what we're looking to create is over the surface, just inside the visible margins. We're looking to have that point going trailing down towards the tip of the Marquise, but to bring those the areas around the edge just slightly wider, and then you can bring that back in. Now the amount of time you spend doing this will be very much worth it. So what I'm going to do is just make this one slightly roughly, and then I will show you one that I've spent several minutes getting together. So we've created a shape that sits inside the outer margins of the gem, and then we're going to put some uprights up at the top at the 1 o'clock position on both sides. Basically, you can call it 11 and 1, or you can flip it over and do that at 1 o'clock on both sides. So very briefly, I'm going to show you quickly, and then I'll show you one that I've created and spent a lot of time getting ready. So I've just opened up these margins at the top, these upright wires, and then I'm just going to pop that over the face of the gem. Now you want your uprights to occur slightly further north than this, so what I would do is just open those back out a little bit and then move that up. But as I say, I'm going to show you one which I've spent a little bit more time getting completely ready. So this is the kind of fit that I'm looking for. I've got my point coming off beneath the end tip of the marquise at one end, and directly opposite that I've got my 12 o'clock wires coming up, which are going to create the neck of the pendant later. So that's the first section of what we're looking to do. Next, what we want to do is to create a shape which is going to go around your inner. So I'm just going to pop the gemstone, the main focal gemstone, out of position for the time being. Hold our featured bead segment or our inner framework down. And then this is what we're looking to create. So again, this is with the 1mm or 18 gauge wire. This can be quite a lot shorter, so probably around about 7 inches or so of the heavier gauge of the two wires. And again, it does pay to warm these wires to get them nice and fluid before you start work, especially as this design translates beautifully to solid precious metals. Going to give that a lovely smooth, just so it's nice and fluid for us. Again, finding that point at the bottom. Now this time, rather than having a very, very sharp point, I want that slightly softer, like so. And then I'm going to just swoosh that out, again, using the heat of my body and my fingers, just to create a much broader line. So what you want it to do is flare around your inner framework. So we have an inner framework with the elongated sections that will make the neck of the pendant, and then we want a flared design coming around that. So this will greatly depend on how large your beads in question are. So for the 2mm iolites, I would take this slightly closer, and for the 4.5 to 5mm faceted fluorites, I would take that slightly broader. Now for the next section of the demonstration, do love that noise, I've got some non-faceted round garnets which I think are going to look lovely. Now these are 2.5mm round garnets, and what we're going to do now is add in a length of 0.4mm gauge or 26 gauge wire. So the next section is a tiny little bit fiddly and repetitive, but once you get into the swing of it, completely achievable. So we're going to work with approximately 20 to 24 inches up to kind of 2 foot, almost 60 centimetres of the lighter gauge wire now, which is a little bit of a handful, but it's well worth it. It's a beautiful design and I absolutely love making these. So if you join me back at the board, we are now going to use, as I say, up to around about 2 feet worth, 60 centimetres or so of the lighter gauge wire, 0.4mm or 26 gauge. You don't want to mess around with this wire too much because you can make it brittle by messing with it. So what I'm going to do is find the approximate centre and find the ends like so, and then on the opposite side of the loop. So what we're going to do is start off on the inner framework. So this is our inner framework, and I'm just going to pop my finer gauge wire underneath. I'm going to open that out slightly, and I'm going to wrap 3 times around the right hand side. So that's once, twice and 3 times. Get that to sit down really neatly and tightly. And then I'm just going to slide that really close to the end and not flip the design, but turn the design around. So my fine gauge wire is still at this stage underneath my inner framework. I'm just going to move some tools out of the way. And then I'm going to come around the outside and wrap again 3 times so that we're making a symmetrical beginning to our pendant. Wire comes around the outside, push those down into position, and then just get those coils nice and tight and neat, like so. So very, very gently just getting those into position. I'm not crushing the wire. Keeping my finer gauge wire underneath. What we're going to do next is just try and control these fine wires a little bit, bring our outer framework into play, and have a look at how that's going to sit. So just pop the framework out again. I'm going to, on my right hand side now, on the finer gauge wire, I'm going to add in one of my chosen beads. It does look beautiful with faceted beads, but in this instance, I'd quite like to work with a non-faceted bead. I think that's going to look absolutely smashing. So just drawing that into position for a second, what we're going to do is re-add our outer framework, allow that to sit. I might just flip that over and draw these end wires ever so slightly up. Sit that into position and see how that looks. I think that looks really lovely. What we're looking to do is try and keep a straight line coming down between the two little sides to the neck at the top. Imagine there's a straight line to the point. We want to keep the point on the outer framework in line with the point on the inner framework. So that might involve just dropping it down ever so slightly, supporting the bead and the frameworks, and then wrapping 3 times around the outer framework. 1 and 2, and then a 3rd time. So at this stage, what we're going to be doing is basically channel setting. So if I just show you what we're going to do, we've come underneath with the bead, we're going to come over the top with a naked pass of just wire, and then we're going to wrap that 3 times around the inner framework. So you can push that down inside like so, hold that neatly and firmly, and then wrap 3 times around just that inner framework, push that down into position before we then again, we're going to add on another bead. So I'm going to show you that one more time, and then I'm going to bring you to a position where you don't have to watch this repeated over and over again. So my eyesight isn't the best, just going to find the bead hole, allow that to zip wire into position, and you can see already that this is quite a traditional channel setting. So I've got bead on one side, plain wire on the other side, and you're always going around the outside, around the outside. So again, we're going to wrap 3 times, that's 1 and 2 and 3, before we return to just the bead, just the bead on the other side, and then just the plain wire on this side. So if you continue in this vein, this is what you will end up with. And with this particular piece, I have graduated some lovely smoky quartz from a more pale to a more dark position. And I think that that is going to look absolutely delightful with the white quartz. So I really like working with gemstones that have a natural variation in colour. Amethyst is a great one. Smoky quartz is a perfect one because it can be called smoky quartz through quite a variety of colourways. So graduating with the same gemstone instead of using different gemstones is just another interesting way to play with colour in your designs. So if you pop back down to the board with me, if you had continued exactly as we said, we've got our beads on one side, and on the back side we've got just plain wire passing. This is classical channel setting. There is a video dedicated to this on the channel if you need any further assistance. And what we've got is those wires passing over on the front. So designated the bead side on the front and the plain wire the back. So you will have this to be quite flat to begin with. The next stage of the demonstration is to actually push the inner framework forward slightly, supporting your gemstones, taking care not to damage them, and just using your thumbs primarily to create a dome. It's really important that you do get this part of the demonstration done. Otherwise, your gemstone may come loose at a later stage. So what we want to achieve is a lovely basket type setting for your central focal gemstone. So I can see that that's slightly wide on the one side. So working with raw copper is lovely. What you may need to do is just slightly alter the bend at the neck, just to make sure that when those two pieces come together, what you will end up with is a nice secure basket into which your gemstone is going to fit. That's all that's going to be on the front side holding the gem in position. We're trying to see as much as possible without having any danger of losing this gemstone at any point. So you must ensure that you do get that basket or that curvature inside the rear of that beaded section. So to draw this together, what we can do, if I just bring these ever so slightly up and out of the way, you can do a very traditional backwards and forwards or a basket weave in the neck design. And then these tail sections, very, very simply, just curl around on the opposite side. And I can show you that now. So I have got the lower of my two tops from the outer framework. I'm going to draw that over the top. What you might like to do is start your basket weave to begin with, because you're not going to be able to get in there once you've actually crossed these wires over. So I'm just going to take the first one all the way around like so, and then back across. And then I'm going to take the second one all the way around and then back across. And you can use these to create little coils if you like, or you can take them to the back and trim them. Their purpose is to hold the front neatly and to ensure that your inner framework and your outer framework are permanently and securely joined. And then you've got this length of wire here and here, which you can bind together to create a simplified bail, or if you want something a little bit more elaborate, go for something a little bit more elaborate. So we're just going to ignore that for now, because you can finish that exactly however you wish to. Flipping over onto the back, again, just going to do one last check before we go any further to make sure that your gem will fit into the basket you've created, but not be pushed through. So I'm going to put a little bit of pressure there, make sure that it's not going to pop through. And you can see size-wise, if you study like so, that the margins of my major gemstone, my feature gemstone, do not fit through the aperture which forms the framework, unless you push it through sideways like I just did. So once this is secure, you'll have a beautiful setting which shows off that beautiful facet work and an almost invisible way to hold it all together. So for the next section of the demonstration, we're going to just very simply house our feature gemstone in position with another length of 1mm or 18 gauge raw copper wire. So if you join me back down to the board, I'm going to generate another short length to work with. I'm just going to give that a bit of a smooth, like so. Cut that away. So this is around about 10 or so inches of that heavier gauge 1mm 18 gauge wire. And again, I'm just going to give that a little bit of a smooth. What I'm going to do is take my bent chain nose pliers, pop them in the very centre of that section of wire, as near as I can gauge it, and then I'm going to use the width of my chain nose pliers to push a bend up like so, which means that what we end up with is a short flat section. This is quite important because if I drop the gemstone out of position for now, what we need to do is bind these two pieces together. Now this is the outer framework and our new extra piece of wire, which I'm just going to very gently curve, like so, and just bring those ends up out of the way for a second. So that's what we're looking to generate. We now need another section of the lighter gauge wire, 26 gauge or 0.4mm. We don't need a huge amount. You can probably raid your scrap pot for this if you need to. And what we're looking to do now is to take our wire and we're going to bind it a good 5 times around one of those upright sections. So if I pop the wire down the centre and then take that tail, I'm giving myself plenty to work with here to just hold on to it and to give that a bit of a push to make sure that I've got that really neat and tidy before I trim away the excess. So what I'd like to do is keep that end section on the inside of the V shape that we've created, or the soft V that we've created, just so that it doesn't get caught up on any clothes or hair or skin. Very gently making that nice and neat, and then drawing it down so that it's right next to that central section. Excuse me, there's a fly. Off he goes. So my finer gauge wire is currently coming underneath my extra framework here. What I want to do is find that end and have that circling around just the outer framework. And what we're going to do basically here is to tie the outer framework together with our extra section of wire. So we're going to take that all the way around. You may need to put it in at the side. And what we're doing, just to repeat, and I'll show you when I can get my hands out of the way, is tying the outer framework to our extra piece of wire. And you may need to just push this down until it sits neatly. And we're looking to tie that around as many times as we can fit neatly, securely, and symmetrically. So I think probably 3 times around both of those pieces, like so, before returning to just our extra framework and then wrapping the same number of times as you did at the beginning, which I think was 5, but you can probably judge that by eye if it's not easy to count or if you've forgotten like me. So I'm just going to spin that around a couple of times, 4 and 5, get that looking as neat and tidy as possible, and then trim away opposite your first one so that that sits inside the extra wire that we've just added. Tidy those up as much as possible. If I flip this over, you'll see that it's a little bit kinked on this side, so I'm going to give that a gentle squeeze. Once I'm happy that it's tidy, what I'm going to do is hold it flat and give that a good squeeze to make sure that that's as neat as it can possibly be. The next thing we're going to do is to flip the design over. Now, this is the last chance you're going to get to give this a polish, so I'm just going to take this to a piece of cloth, make sure that I don't have any fingerprints on it, front and back as much as possible. Pop that into position. So for the next section, what we're looking to do is put lovely warmth into these two sections. Give it a little bit of a swoosh, elevate your design, and then pull that over the rear of that quartz. So you can see at this juncture, this is how the whole thing is going to be held into position. So this is why it's important to create that basket, because the basket is going to not only stop the gemstone from going forwards out the front of the design, but it's going to stop it from going to the left and to the right. So you do need to ensure that there's plenty of dishing, so the inner framework is much more forwards than the rear framework. And you can see on one of these examples that I've created earlier that that really nestles around the gem, and there's no way that that can come out. So we've got two lines just circling around the outer edges. I'm not going to worry about here and here because that's all nice and secure because of the dishing that we put into our basket. So you will do exactly the same as you did for the outer framework, and you're just going to wrap. If I take the first one around once like so and back in the same direction, and then exactly the same on the second side. So once all the way around and off in the same direction. Once you are happy that everything is nice and secure, that's when you can start to just open these wires out to the maximum safe, secure distance. Now, quartz is quite a firm gemstone, quite a hard gemstone. It's reasonably high on the Mohs scale, so I don't have any fear really using my pliers quite close to this, just to make sure. You can see I'm using very, very old pliers that have got a nice smooth surface, and I'm just making that wire reflect the outer edges of the gemstone. Give that a hearty shake. That gem, that central gem, is going nowhere. What it remains for me to do is some basket weave and some coils just to finish these up so that you have a beautiful finished Fancy Marquise pendant. I hope you've enjoyed that. I realise it's a little bit more challenging than some of the work we've done recently, but I have absolutely fallen in love with this technique, and I've had so many people ask me how I've done it that I wanted to share it with you. Thanks again for continuing to support me here on the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Bye for now.